What's up, guys? It's Ivan, and on this channel, I provide tips, tricks, advice, and strategies for your graduate school applications. So if you are new here, consider subscribing. In today's video, I wanted to show you all what it's like to do a PhD presentation. So back at the beginning of this quarter, my advisor, who also serves as the professor for the class ITA, asked me if I wanted to share my research with the undergraduate class, and I said yes. So in the syllabus, I am put as a guest lecturer, and so I share with them my research that's ongoing right now. So in this video, you will see that it is very long because I am showcasing the presentation that I actually did to the undergraduate class. I do want to say that I did cut some pieces out just because students were talking and engaging in the conversation, so I didn't want to put them on the spot on YouTube, so I did omit some of that information. If you want to look at the behind the scenes of how I ended up creating my PowerPoint and the struggles I had, go check out the cards up here. That way you're able to see what happened behind the scenes. I hope you enjoy this video. So today's topic is titled The Impact of First Year Seminars on First Year Latinx Students from Community College During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And I'll share a little bit more about like the context and who I researched and how I went about that throughout the PowerPoint. But I first want to give you the agenda just because I know for me when I'm in a class or in a lecture, I like to know what's going to happen. And so here we're going to go over a brief introduction of who I am. I know Dr. Contreras kind of gave a little bit of information about who I am, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk about like some of the issues that I've seen and I experienced in education coming from all these identities that I do possess. So I'll go over that first. That way you get to know a little bit more about me, and then that's going to lead into why I'm this type of research. I'm also going to go over my research agenda. So yeah, so I'm going to go over some of the projects I have done as an undergraduate student, but also what I'm currently doing as a graduate student, and then what I hope to do in the future. Then we're going to do a small little free write activity where I'm going to have you engage in a free write activity where you're able to kind of reflect on your experience this year and maybe even last year during the COVID-19 and the transition over to online learning. I'm going to provide some national and Washington state landscape because this study was focused in the state of Washington. So I'm going to give you some um, data on enrollment rates and how that relates to this study. Then I'm going to go over the purpose of the study, methodologies, findings, and then at the end, I want to kind of bring it all together and tie in your free write activity. So I want to do a little activity with all you. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms where you're going to discuss action plans or ideas that UCSD can implement post COVID-19 in terms of online learning or just really learning in general pedagogy and just activities that professors could implement in their classrooms. So I'm trying to figure out like what can we learn from this COVID-19 pandemic in terms of pedagogy and teaching and learning, and what can we use to apply to post COVID-19 situations. Okay, so we're gonna start off with a couple of pictures of myself. So the first picture here is me when I was young. I think I was maybe 2, and this was taken in Mexico. So I do come from a immigrant family. My parents immigrated from Michoacan, Mexico in the mid 1980s, and right after I was born in the Fresno County area, my family moved to Mexico, and I was there for 4 years, and then we came back here to the United States, and we were based in the Fresno County area, and that's where I attended schools for elementary and middle school. But because I did come from an immigrant background, I and a mixed status family at that point too, because I was the only documented person in my family. I had one sister, and then my father and mother, and they were undocumented. So while I was growing up, I witnessed and I experienced a lot of challenges that these types of families do experience. And so a lot of the times when we focus on like education, for example, I was kind of stripped from some of the privileges that I did possess as a US citizen because I did live in a mixed status family. So for example, like I wasn't able to do certain things like sports for a long time. I wasn't able to go on field trips or really do extracurriculars when I was growing up because my parents didn't know that much about education due to them coming from Mexico and having a different system of education over there, and also because I did live in a mixed status family, they just didn't know how to navigate that and use my status as a US citizen to kind of leverage that and so help them, but also me. And so growing up, I did experience a lot of those discrepancies in a mixed status family and from an immigrant background. My family also did a lot of agricultural work. So we were seasonal migrant field worker families. So what that means is we were bouncing up and down from California to Washington pretty much my whole like life. It seemed like until we settled in one spot. But in the summers we would go up to Washington and we would do like cherry picking. We would do apple picking, and well, I wouldn't do anything because I was young, but my parents wouldn't. But I would come with them, and um, and we would just be bouncing back and forth, and we would spend a lot of time like we would spend like half a year in one place, half a year in the other place, and then just kind of go back and forth. And so I went to a bunch of elementaries and middle schools growing up, and because of that, I also experienced a lot of educational challenges because of the whole bouncing back and forth, different systems, different states, different requirements, and all these things that I'm sharing here kind of progress into why I conduct a certain research that I do conduct because of these experiences. Finally, when I was in high school, my junior year, my family decided to settle in the rural community called Soap Lake. This right here is Soap Lake. It has a population of about 1,500 people. Although I've never seen that many people in the town, honestly, I think the population's lower. But I lived in a rural community. And whenever I think about my experience as a rural student, both in Washington and California, it definitely differs a lot because what we consider rural in California is completely different from like Eastern Washington, at least in my experience. This, like the Fresno County, the Fresno, or I didn't live in Fresno, I lived in a small town called Reedley outside of Fresno. And that rural community was way bigger in size and population than Soap Lake. So I experienced different challenges in the educational system in these different rural contexts. So that also shapes the way in which I, think about rural issues and rural students, especially rural students of color, because there is very few of us, especially in Washington State. There's very few rural students of color in these educational systems, and so I'm trying to figure out like what can I do to improve practices, policy to support rural students of color in these contexts. So right here we see Soap Lake, and the population of my high school or high school, middle school, because they combined it, it's around 250 students. So that's combined middle school and high school. And so my graduating class was actually one of the biggest in high school, and it was 39 students. My sister, who graduated 4 years later, her graduating class was 11 students. So that kind of gives you an idea of how small this community is. And a lot of these communities that are rural in Washington, Eastern Washington, are similar in terms of size. Um, so we do see a lot of really small towns that face different, rural issues and challenges than maybe like the California rural context, or even like for example Moses Lake, where I live now, is way bigger than Soap Lake. So I like to look at my work more on the smaller schools in rural Washington State than the bigger schools, but I think they all combine to and they all align. Something else that I do want to mention before I get to my next slide here is when I was in high school, I was one of two students in my graduating class that actually went to college, and there was 39 of us, like I mentioned. So right there we see like access rate is really small. Not that many students from my community in Salt Lake, and just really in general, if you look at national statistics for rural students, um, not a lot of us go to college. And the way in which I was able to learn about college or university was through Google. So I literally Googled my way into university. And what I did was I went on Google and I was searching up how to go to college. Then I found the step by step guide month by month that kind of guided me towards university, how to apply for financial aid, how to apply for universities, what are the requirements like SATs. And that's really how I learned how to go to college. We did have a school counselor, but honestly, they weren't as helpful. And because my high school didn't have like a college going culture, um, there was really not that many people that were supportive in my journey to higher education. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. So, like Dr. Contreras mentioned, I did end up going to Washington State University, which is actually in a rural community of Pullman in Eastern Washington. The university is big, but the context is a rural community. It's in the middle of nowhere, they like to say. But at this institution, I actually felt like I grew as a person, as a scholar, as an academic, because I was highly involved. And I'm a first generation college student, so it was really important for me to finish my 4 year degree, not only to show like my family, my immediate family, that people like me, people who come from these backgrounds could succeed in higher education, but also for my community. And as an undergraduate student, I wanted to be a teacher because of some of these issues that I saw in my experience. So I wanted to be an English teacher, and I wanted to go back to my communities and teach students how to write at the college level. Because when I was at WSU, I ended up struggling with academic writing, and no one really taught me how to cite papers, how to critically think. Even that term was new to me when I was a first year student at WSU. And so I really wanted to be a teacher to like go back and support my community and help them access education, but also help them improve their writing so they can be able to succeed in writing intensive courses in college. And so I also came from a income background, and that really did motivate me to become this teacher who can help others like me succeed, but also navigate the system, not only the K through 12, but the higher ed system as well. And then during my undergraduate career, I also was very involved in research. I was in this program called the Ronald D. McNair Achievement Program. They do have one at UCSD, and that program really helped me with kind of learning what is research, how can I use research to support my communities, help my communities, and that's really where my thinking of getting a PhD started. And because of the mentors that I did gain from that program. So if you're interested in doing research or getting a PhD, I highly suggest that you look at the McNair program at UCSD and try to get involved with research in that sense. After my WSU experience, I went to Harvard for a master's program where I focused on education policy and management. And what I really wanted to do is um, learn about policy and how to design it and then implement it. And the reason why was because when I was reading a lot of literature in my undergraduate classes for education, I noticed that a lot of people who create policy don't look like me or don't have my background. And I always had like this push against that, just because I always thought to myself, how can this person who doesn't know, who hasn't lived this experience, how are they able to make policies that affect me and my community? So I always had like the struggle with that mindset there. And so I wanted to go back, or I wanted to learn about policy because I didn't know nothing about policy. And I wanted to use that information to support my communities, to increase college access rates, retention, and all those issues that I saw in my community. And so that's what I was really doing at Harvard. I was really diving into issues of Latinx communities, particularly rural communities. I was looking at family engagement and how we can, better um, incorporate families, Latinx families, into our educational systems, and building policy around that. That's what I was really focusing on. I did dive into other areas like motivation, and how can we motivate our students to want to pursue higher ed, or even just kind of get through high school. And so I was kind of diving into different issues. And at Harvard, I actually you know, my experience was great because that's when I first saw like the potential of policy and practice, and how that can, change generations, how we can implement practices that can really support these students. And I don't think I got that in my undergraduate career. At this level, I did. I was able to see exactly how data can drive results. And that really motivated me to get into my next line of work. So after, it's a little bit blurry, but after my Harvard experience, I ended up working for the TRIO program, so TRIO Student Support Services, and I directed the program at this rural community college in Eastern Washington. And really, the purpose of the program is to help underrepresented students, so first generation, low income, and people with disabilities. We want to help them succeed at the community college level, and then have them transfer over to a 4 year school. So my role really entailed me helping these students with like educational plans. I helped them with a lot of things really. I'm just kind of I was a mentor to them, and I was able to provide advice. But one of the things that I did do that a lot of community colleges don't do in particular is motivate the students to go beyond just their like community. So for example, I was telling my students about all these opportunities to do research, and usually at the community college level, at least in Washington and this experience here, a lot of my students never heard about research. So I was exposing these students to different like university level experiences than just what they were experiencing at this. We call this college a commuter college just because a lot of our students were there to get a degree, and that's pretty much it. And then use that to apply to practice in the community. But I wanted to show my students here that there is more than Wenatchee. This is Wenatchee. There's more that's outside of Wenatchee. So I wanted to show these students, go to this research conference, or apply to this really elite research program. I would show them like, look at Harvard, look at all these Ivy League schools, because no one really has showed these students those type of opportunities. So I wanted to expose my students to more elite spaces, because so a lot of the time these students have like a deficit mindset. They don't believe in themselves. So I wanted to like, kind of push them to like believe in themselves and think beyond what they're capable of doing. And that's really that all this experiences lead to my agenda for research. So as an undergraduate student, I conducted two studies. So before I get into that, actually, in general, what I like to look at is access and equity issues in higher education with a specific focus on men of color, rural higher education, and then community colleges. And all that stems from my experiences that I just shared with all of you. And so as an undergraduate student, I did conduct two small studies. One of them was titled The Educational Barriers and Coping Strategies of Latino Male Undergraduates. And I did that at the University of Arizona alongside one of my mentors, Dr. Cabrera. And that also stemmed from my experience as a Latino male navigating the educational system and the higher ed system. And so all these projects that I do work on are related to my background and what I hope to pursue in the future, but also what I hope to help my community with. So the other project that I worked on at WSU was this project titled Reaching Out to Fathers, a study of father involvement of first year students at WSU. And really the reason why I chose to research this topic was because in my own experience, I saw that Latino fathers are usually not as involved as mothers in their children's educations, especially when we look at it at the higher education space. It like as we grow older, the family engagement seems to decrease. But I think is really important for families to get involved no matter what level, and especially Latino fathers, just because they tend to not be as involved. And so that was like a really more passion project for me that I was involved in for 2 years as an undergrad. And then finally, currently I'm doing a project with CASP, and we're studying disqualified students. We're trying to figure out their experiences pre, during, and post disqualification process. That way we can improve the program services. But really, what I'm trying to get at here is all these projects here and my research agenda is really tied to my identities, my experiences, and that's kind of how I see my work going moving forward. All right, so now I want to dive into the actual project that I've been working on since last quarter. And like I mentioned earlier, it's titled The Impact of First Year Seminars on First Year Latinx Community College Students During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So the first thing that I want to do is have you all do a little free write. So I want you to think about your experience. Let's say this year with your education at UCSD. So I kind of came up with some questions here that you can use to guide your thinking, but really all I want you to do is type on your computer or write physically on a notepad and write down your experiences, like, what has gone well, what hasn't gone well. So a couple of questions here that I have. What are some challenges you have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic as a whole? How has COVID-19 impacted your educational experiences? What has your online experience been like? What do you like about online instruction? What do you dislike? And what has been your experience with faculty and staff in terms of the online platform? Or if you are on campus, how has that shifted from what we're used to? Um, so I'm gonna give you all 2 minutes to just do a brain dump of just kind of like a free write, and then I'll have some of you share out. in the chat or unmute yourself, and then I will start with my study. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put a timer here on my phone and let's do the 2 minutes. So go ahead and start that. So before I get into my methodologies, I wanted to give some background on enrollment information. And the reason why is because the students that I did observe in this case, they chose to attend college um, during a pandemic. And so what I really want to get at here is kind of talk about like, the enrollment, what that looks like, and then what it looks like for Washington State. Because I want to make clear that like, as we'll read here is enrollment went down. So because these Latinx students are chose to go to college, community college, I feel like we need as practitioners, as higher ed practitioners, and then policymakers, we need to act on that. We need to make sure that our students, our Latinx students in this case, are and so supported. And so I want to make that just kind of clear. So we're going to go through some enrollment data here. That way, you're able to kind of understand what happened. So this information here, the national enrollment data was taken from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. And so we know that for the spring 2021 quarter, which is this quarter here, we know that enrollment went down. So if we look at undergraduates as a whole, it went down 4.5%. When we look at graduate enrollment, though, it actually went up, which is interesting. So I would definitely want to learn more about that because I'm wondering why. Um, and then overall, when we look at college enrollment, it it went low, it went down again, so 2.9% since last spring. That's overall, not just the spring quarter. If we break that down a little bit further and look at it at community college, the community college was most impacted. So it was down 9.5% from last spring. And then if we break that down even further and we look at it more in the racial and ethnic groups, we see that Native American enrollment decreased the most, and then Asian and Latinx enrollment also dropped in comparison to their growing enrollment in the previous years. So I have a couple of graphs here that are going to help you look at the state of Washington. I know most of you probably either grew up in California or we've learned a lot about the California system here. So a couple of things about Washington State and enrollment. So we see that we know that it declined in 2 year and 4 year public institutions in Washington State. This little graph here breaks it down for you a little bit further. So it tells us that in fall 2019, fall 2020, and fall 2021, we know that 3,000 fewer students enrolled in public four-year institutions. So that's a 2.4% drop. And then when we look at community college or two-year schools, 43,000 fewer students enrolled, causing a 19.3% drop. And one of the reasons why this huge drop in enrollment for community college students might be is because um, if you read about community college literature, we know that community colleges they support a lot of students for and students that have different goals. Some of them want to transfer, some of them want to attain a technical degree to pursue a trade, some of them are there to just to take classes, a lot of them are there to learn English, for example, or maybe get their high school diploma. So there's a range of different goals that these students face. So one of the reasons why this enrollment drop is very large could be because um, online learning could have impacted enrollment because of the hands-on learning that's happening in the welding, plumbing, or construction trades. So maybe students didn't want to, because of the virus, they didn't want to catch the virus, so they didn't want to go into at the physical community college to practice their trade. And so enrollment could have been down because of that reason. But also, if we look at literature, we also know that affordability was a big factor in terms of this decrease of enrollment, as well as concerns about the virus because it was very novel. We didn't know that much about it at the beginning. We didn't know, or we kind of knew the high risk, but and students didn't want to, engage in that and potentially experience these high risks um, situations that can happen by getting the virus. So something interesting that the data that I pulled suggested was that at 4 years institutions, we saw that fall enrollment declined the most for white students, as we can see here in our graph. Um, and there was an increase for, they say Hispanic here, so Latinx students, and so we can see that here. So that was an interesting data that I pulled, and I'm interested in to learning why that was the case at four-year schools. So if we look at the two-year schools or community college, we see, like I mentioned earlier, this large decline in enrollment. And the greatest was for students of color, specifically American Indian students and Hispanic Latino students were the biggest drops, as we can see here in our graphs. Um, yeah, if we look at Latinx students here, it was minus 22.8%. All right, so this enrollment talk leads into my research objectives, my research questions here. So what I really wanted to find out, because like I mentioned earlier, like based on this data, like and the drop of the and the large drop of enrollment for Latinx students, I wanted to find out, some of the positive things that were happening in classrooms, in seminars that we can use to better support our Latinx students. So I was taking more of an assets based approach to my research, just because I wanted to see what this program is doing in their seminars that are yielding great results, which I'll get into a little bit more. But and I wanted to use that data to be able to share with other seminars, other Latinx programs that so that we can help our Latinx students um, in their educational journeys during the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of the questions or one of the objectives that I did have was I wanted to better understand the ways in which first year seminars shape the educational experiences of first year community college students during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the title of my project. And then I also wanted to seek out and I wanted to explore the role that seminar instructors have or had on shaping first year college student experiences. And so the way I went about finding out those answers was by going back to the community college that I worked at, and I observed a seminar. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about the program that I worked with. So the program is called the College Assistance Migrant Program. It's CAMP for short. And what this program does, it's a federally funded program which assists students from seasonal migrant field worker backgrounds or children of such workers. So your family either had to work in the field or agriculture, or you as a student had to work as well. There's other guidelines that go about being enrolled in this program, but that's just kind of like the general sense here. And they provide services such as counseling, advising, tutoring, skills workshops, financial aid stipends, first year seminars, and more. And so I included this map here that kind of showcased the CAMP programs nationwide. And so if we look, there's a few in California. The image is really small, so you can't really see exactly where these schools are at. But then if we look at Washington, there's a good number of schools there, CAMP programs as well, and so forth. And so this program is effective. I was actually part of this program as a first year student at WSU in my undergrad, and it was really supportive in my first year. I also want to mention that this program is a first year program. So once you have reached a certain amount of credits, then you are not eligible for the program anymore. So it's only supportive of first year students who identify as this background here, like I mentioned. Um, yeah, so it's trying to get, so the purpose of it is to get them through their first year. So a little bit more about the field site. So this camp program was at a rural community college in North Central Washington, and the enrollment of that college is 5,700 students. And this college, they combine this enrollment number into two different campuses. So it's combined. So Wenatchee campus and then OMAC campus, and the breakdowns right there. So 87%, which is the main campus, and then 13%, which is the satellite campus or the campus that's attached to the main campus. And then this college, community college, is also a Hispanic serving institution. So it has an HSI designation. And in 2018, 2019, which is the most recent data I can pull, there was 46% Latinx students during that time. So we see that there's a large amount of Latinx students at this community college, and specifically this program, they target the Latinx community. and so the majority of the students in this program are identify as Latinx. This was a case study, and I wanted to focus on the experiences of these camp students during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then a couple of things about the program. So the program has been on campus for 11 years. And so it's well established on campus, has a great reputation in terms of their outcomes. They yield great results. Like I mentioned in this last point here, an example of this is they hold 95% retention rate fall to fall. So that means that 95% of their students move on to their second year um, if they're in the program. And then the program does have four employees, so a project director, a retention specialist, a recruiter, program assistant, and then they also all these people who are currently at the institution, they all identify as a seasonal migrant field worker background, and they are trilingual. And I say trilingual because I'm including Spanglish as a third language. I'm not sure if that's an official language, but that's going to be important for the results in the findings that I do find later on today. But Spanish, English, Spanglish, they all these four employees speak these three languages. So the method. So what did I do to find the answers to my questions? So I went to their college navigation course, which is a requirement for every student in the program. There's roughly around 60 students per cohort. Some students do drop, as we saw that there's 95% retention rate. So there is some students that do drop off, throughout the year, but they do recruit 60 students, and these college navigation courses are split into two sections, so 30 students roughly in each section. These seminars do consist of guest speakers, so they bring in guest speakers on different topics. When I was conducting these observations, their focus was financial literacy, so they brought some guest speakers that spoke about what's it called, like investing and budgeting, for example. And so they do interactive workshops, they do collaborations between students and critical dialogue, and that's all that happens in these seminars. These seminars are hour-long seminars, so I went to 6-hour-long Zoom classroom observations for these camp students in their first year. And the reason why I chose to use a first year seminar as my sample is because first year seminars are high impact practices that serve as a tool to support students from underrepresented and marginalized communities. And so I knew that they were going to do some great work in these seminars, especially given the reputation of the CAP program at this institution. And so I wanted to see, what are the positive things that are coming out of these seminars, and how can we use that to inform other programs or um, other programs campus-wide in different contexts. And then the final thing that I want to mention in terms of my methods is that I was a participant observer, which means that I was not only observing, but I was also helping out with questions. Excuse me, questions. I was helping out in the breakout rooms. I was helping out with just different topics and kind of sharing my knowledge on different topics, especially because I do have experience in these type of spaces, federally funded programs, and I did similar work with the TRIO program. So they were kind of utilizing me in that sense as well. And I knew the staff and I knew the students, or some of the students. And so that's why I chose to participate, but also observe. All right, so some of the key findings. So after conducting these 6 observations that were hour long, what I did was I recorded them and I transcribed them, and then I pulled out some key themes. And before I get into the themes, something that I do want to mention is that these results are preliminary. So that means that I want to extend this study. So hopefully my next step, which you'll see later, is to do some interviews. But from what I pulled from the observations, here's what I found that were effective strategies to support Latinx students in this space. So the first thing that I found is I'm titling this theme as consejos as a tool to establish a safe and welcoming Zoom environment. The second point that I found, and I'll go more into detail about these in the next couple of slides. The second thing that I found was this utilization of multilingual instruction to support first year students' sense of belonging. The third thing that I found was the implementation of retention strategies to enhance first year student success. And then finally, collaboration with college stakeholders to improve educational opportunities. So let's start off with the first finding here. So I pulled out some quotes from some of the students that I was hearing in the dialogue and also the instructors. And like I mentioned earlier, I was taking an assets based approach, just to critically think about, like, creating a climate for academic success, a safe space, and things that Latinx students really thrive on. And so here are a couple of quotes that I pulled. So the first quote, like I mentioned, topic was like investing, financial literacy. The quarter was focused on that topic. And so here's what I pulled. So someone said, investing and opening a retirement plan is important because some people, like my parents, do not have the privilege to do so. My parents worked in the fields all their lives and came to this country without papeles. They did not know anything about saving or investing because no one taught them about these things. And so, what I'm arguing here is that this quote here came from one of the instructors. There was actually two instructors in the room at this time, and he's using his experiences. He's using, papeles, so like different language, to kind of, share knowledge to these students, give them consejos. You should be opening up this retirement plan. You should be thinking about investing for your future success, not only for you but for your family. And so, by engaging and or having these consejos in this Zoom classroom, you're establishing this safe, welcoming environment. You're being inclusive of the students' identities and their backgrounds. You understand what they're going through because maybe you went through that, like as this person mentioned, working in the fields, and we know that the camp program, all these students have some type of experience working in the fields, whether it's themselves going out there and picking fruit, or maybe it's their parents who went through that experience and they kind of saw their parents go through it. So they're establishing this, connection with the student. So another quote that I pulled that I thought was really important to this claim that I'm making here is, um, so it reads, I am sorry that I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but así es la vida. In life, you never know what will be thrown out at you, at what opportunities you might need to write down and what opportunities you might need to take. So the reason why I pulled this quote is because this facilitator again was trying to share with the student, like, life happens. And I guess what I'm trying to get here is that they're not using academic language. It's more conversational. They're using their experiences to teach their students different aspects of life that, traditionally we don't see in the classroom, especially when it comes to a seminar that is not targeted towards Latinx students. So I think in the future we should definitely be implementing, when we're working with Latinx students, we should be implementing, a pedagogy that uses consejos as a way to, invite these students to this safe classroom so students can thrive in it. Um, So the next claim that I found from my preliminary data was utilizing multilingual instruction to support first year students' sense of belonging. And so I pulled a little quote here that says that culturally relevant pedagogy and practice enables students to experience academic success while developing cultural awareness and maintaining their own culture. And so I truly believe that if you're in a space where you know that most of your students speak a certain language, that you utilize that as a tool to, build that sense of belonging, especially for students who are first year, because when we think about first year Latinx students, they, especially during the pandemic, we haven't stepped, or they haven't stepped foot on campus, so they don't even know what a higher education environment looks like. And most of these students in the study were first generation, so they didn't get that initial impression of what it's like to go to college. And it's definitely more difficult as a first generation college student to navigate a higher ed space virtually. And so I think it's really important for policymakers and practitioners in higher ed to infuse some type of cultural understanding that's going to help the students feel safe and supportive, and, a source that they can rely on for different questions. So here's a couple of dialogue that I pulled from the data that I was looking at. So before the seminar started, what happened was Maria and Alfredo, who are the facilitators, they were engaging in different conversations with students. And as you can tell right here, none of these were really academic again. And so let's read the one on the left. So Maria was asking a student, Oh, and by the way, she would greet every student by name and would just kind of say hi while students came into the room. So Maria said to one of the students, "Where are you living again? Waterville, Bridgeport?" And the student said, "Waterville." And then Alfredo jumped in, who's another facilitator. He jumped in and asked, "Are you doing any winter activities up there, like snowboarding, snowmobiling, snowshoeing?" And then the student responded with, "No, pero me gusta pescar. We caught 15 fish in 2 hours." And then Maria responded with, "What kind of fish was it?" And then he said trout. And then Maria was like, "I don't know much about fish, pero a mí me gusta una mojarrita con limón y una tortilla." So as you can tell here, this interaction was again informal, non-academic, but it really helps the student, like, again, feel safe, feel welcomed, and not feel the pressures of academia, and I feel like that's really important, to utilize what you already possess and what you know about your students, what you know about your context, and infuse that into these pedagogy, into these instructional practices. That way your students are more comfortable, asking those hard questions, or asking you how to navigate this system that's not meant for people like us, like Latinx students. Um, all right, I'm going to move on to the next theme here that I found. So the next thing that I found that was really utilized in this camp classroom seminar, and this really campus wide, was this implementation of retention strategies to enhance first year student success, especially during this COVID-19 landscape. And so what I saw was that the facilitators infused excuse me, a bunch of strategies to help their students. So one of the things that they did throughout the year were these study tables, these tutors that they hired and that they encouraged the students to go to. So here's a quote that I pulled. So at the beginning of the seminars, what the facilitators did was they had announcements, and one of the announcements was study tables tutoring. So one of the facilitators said, "Last week, no one attended study tables." Then she said, "Please try to attend our weekly study tables. Our tutors are excited to help you. There are 7 of you who have not submitted your progress reports. The deadline to submit those have already passed, but todavía quiero ver sus notas. Please submit those to me on Canvas or email them to me." So even in this quote here, in these announcements, we see retention strategies. So one of them is the tutoring, right? So if you're struggling with some academic content, you can go to this tutor, and she even says, like, please attend, even if you're not struggling, go ahead and attend these so you can get support and you can work through your assignments. But they also implemented this progress report as a way to monitor academic success. And so for this program, every quarter they have to submit this progress report. They have to ask their instructors, what's my grade? How am I doing? And that's kind of serves two purposes here. So it does serve the purpose of seeing the progression through the quarter, but it also pushes students to talk to their professors, which is another way to increase retention. If you're talking to your professors, you are most likely going to ask for support on your assignments. You're gonna establish this connection with them, and they might get to know you a little bit more, and they can serve as a resource when you are struggling. So so even in this little quote here, we see a number of strategies to enhance retention for first year students, especially Latinx students in the pandemic. Um, the second quote that I pulled here, or conversation that I pulled here, is a different type of strategy. So the CAP program does offer a national, or I guess in this case, it was a regional conference that was for leadership skills. And so they encourage their students to attend this leadership conference. It's virtual, obviously, and they paid for their students to go to this conference virtually. And so they were discussing doing like a little debrief of what happened at this conference. So there was a question posed that was kind of like, what was your experience like? Did you like it? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? So one of the students said, "A mí me gustó mucho A mí me gustó mucho y era bien motivador. Me gustó mucho su presentación." So this student was referring back to a motivational speaker. And this motivational speaker was focused on the COVID-19 again, and how to motivate students to get through this experience that we're all facing right now. Student number two said, we got into the we got into the icebreaker, so breakout rooms. That's where I got my thinking cap on. I learned how to manage time wisely. It was really helpful. It opened my eyes to see how much time I was wasting. I am also starting to write more in my planner. So as we can tell here, this student, through this conference, they were able to learn like the effective time management skills and also the effective usage of a planner. And so as we can tell, like some of these quotes here that I pulled, we see a bunch of retention strategies that are being utilized in the Zoom classroom, but also outside of the Zoom classroom that have supported these first year students. So the last theme that I want to touch on today is this notion of collaboration with college stakeholders to improve educational opportunities for Latinx first year students during the pandemic. So what I noticed in this observations that I did was a bunch of collaboration with different departments on campus. So at this time, the campus was shifting over to a new system, which is called CTC Link. And so one of the ways that the camp employees were trying to mitigate some of the challenges that these students might face in terms of that shift over to a new system, what they did was they implemented and they designated one class period on making that shift. So in these quotes here, you're going to see a little bit about what I'm talking about. So the first one says, so the facilitator said, "Now I am going to share the CTC link in the chat. That way you all can activate your accounts. I worked with the IT department to allow you all to activate your accounts 1 week earlier than any other student." So as we can tell here, the facilitator, prior to the class session, they worked with IT to make sure that these students were allowed to access their new accounts earlier than any other student. And they did that because they knew that if they waited till like the day that every student could access their new accounts, there could be a crash in the system. There's definitely going to be some challenges. And so the camp staff knew that prior to this shift, and they wanted to mitigate those challenges for these students. So they chose to give them access at that time. And then when I was observing, the students actually had the time to go in there, change their account, and address some of the challenges. And there was a lot, by the way. And so one of the things that the other facilitator did was here's the quote. He said, "I am already working on the email to the CTC director to ask what students can do if they receive the error or if they cannot activate their accounts." So in this session here, I saw a lot of students struggling. They couldn't access their new accounts. And so at that moment, the other facilitator, he was sending out an email to the CTC director to make sure that these students were in contact with the person that was going to help them with this challenge. So, in essence, what I'm trying to say here with this little data that I do have is that collaboration with college stakeholders campus wide is really important for the educational success of Latinx students, and especially during the pandemic, when we're seeing more of these issues arise. So the next couple of steps that I want to do with this study is I want to conduct research. This data that I just shared with you was solely based on observation, which does tell us a lot, but also doesn't tell us a lot. So what I want to do next is I want to conduct interviews with 20 to 30 of these students as well as staff, and kind of really get a full picture of some of these claims that I'm making, and maybe just refine those claims or come up with new claims that I want to introduce for this study. I also want to review the literature on COVID-19 and community college or higher education, and kind of see what are other people doing, what are other scholars saying about COVID-19 and community college and higher ed, or maybe COVID-19 and first year seminars. And I want to just kind of review that and kind of see what's out there and how I can improve my study based on some of the gaps that haven't been researched yet. And then the last thing that I want to do is I want to also utilize a theoretical framework to guide my analysis, because at this point I don't have that, but I do want to work towards that so I can make more clear claims and more evidence-based claims.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in more content like this, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video.